Have you ever wondered what makes a high-performing team? There's really two ingredients to make a high-performing team. By far, the number one ingredient is psychological safety, and the second one is performance standards, having clear performance standards. My name is Dr. George Hanshaw. I'm the Director of E-Learning Operations at Los Angeles Pacific University, and I'm going to show you how to build psychological safety within your team. This is the first part of a series. We're going to go over psychological safety as a whole, so you know exactly what it is, and the first stage of psychological safety, which is inclusion safety. There's two recent books that have come out, one by Timothy R. Clark, The Four Stages of Psychological Safety. This is a wonderful book. I'm going to be certified in the four stages of psychological safety. If you would like to get a hold of me, it's ghanshaw@lapu.edu. And there's The Fearless Organization by Amy C. Edmondson as well. Both of these books are excellent books if you're looking for more context or more reading about psychological safety, because like I said, it is the number one ingredient to creating high-performing and innovative teams. So let's dive in and look at psychological safety as a whole, and then we're going to move closer and we're going to look at the first stage of psychological safety in the following video that's on inclusion safety. There are four stages to building psychological safety. There's inclusion safety, learner safety, contributor safety, and challenger safety. And we're going to get through inclusion safety within this webinar. So Google's Project Aristotle, you've probably heard about this. Google's Project Aristotle, they started out looking for, hey, what makes a great team? They looked at diversity of participants, they looked at age, they looked at cohesiveness, how well they got along inside and outside of the team, if they hung out with each other outside of the team, and a whole bunch of other factors and constructs, and none of them made a difference for high-performing teams. What makes a high-performing team? What did make a difference, what the number one thing they found that made a difference, was creating an environment of psychological safety. So they dove in, they said, what is psychological safety? Well, it's in Tim Clark's book, The Four Stages of Psychological Safety, and my favorite definition is it's rewarded vulnerability. It's when we can bring our whole self to work and we're celebrated for it. Now, one thing I want to put right now is, remember, there's two things to create high-performing teams. There's psychological safety and performance standards. And when we talk about rewarded vulnerability, absolutely, we should be rewarded for bringing our whole self to work, bringing ideas, and we should feel safe that we're not going to be bombarded or attacked for bringing in differing ideas. This does not mean that we lower standards. When you have teams with a high sense of psychological safety, they perform at a higher level. So there is no lowering the bar. So I've heard that on a couple of occasions where people think it might be lowering the bar, and that is the furthest thing from the truth. It's creating an environment where we can bring our whole selves to work, and that bar gets raised, and it gets raised quite a bit, not a small increment. That bar gets raised a high level. So psychological safety means that we're innovative, we come up with great ideas, and you're creating problem solvers and leaders within the team. And that's an important thing to discuss now, because psychological safety, some people equate it directly to trust. Well, they are two separate things. If you have a team with a high level of psychological safety, you will have trust built into that team. But trust does not mean you have psychological safety. Trust is on an individual basis. So that would be between myself and someone else, if I trust them or not. Psychological safety is a team phenomenon. And it's the team phenomenon of, hey, if I come up with this idea, I know that it will not be, I won't get beat up for it. I won't feel like I'm dumb for bringing this concept into our team. I'm going to be celebrated for bringing myself. Does it mean that we're going to do something with that concept? Absolutely not, because two things are required for psychological safety as well, and that is intellectual friction and creative friction. So in a team that has high levels of psychological safety, there's a lot of discussion and back and forth on what will work, what won't work, but it's never focused on an individual person. It's focused on a concept or topic. And there's a few things that I always do with my team that I believe have had some really great outcomes. So remember, psychological safety, it's shared vulnerability, and it's a group phenomenon. It is not an individual phenomenon. And one thing that really happens is you can have you have your larger organization, and different groups within that organization have different levels of psychological safety. And that is because the leader of the group sets the psychological safety for that team. So the team leader sets psychological safety for the team. So if you're a leader in charge of several teams, then you have to have the leaders who are in charge of individual teams know how to set that. And you're leading by example when they meet with you. And you're very purposeful about creating psychological safety, because it doesn't happen by accident. It's a very purposeful endeavor to take on. And it starts with the leader. If the environment is not set, people are not going to bring their whole self to work because it simply is not safe. And you may be thinking, oh my goodness, this sounds like introvert won't do it, extrovert will do it, or something about personality. It has been tested many times, and it has nothing to do with personality. Introvert, extrovert, it has negligible effects on the psychological safety and performance of the team. And that goes for the leader as well, because to be a leader, to create that environment, a transformational leader is also called the quiet leader. And they are very good at setting up an environment where psychological safety and people thrive. Threat detection. When we are involved with threat detection, what does that look like for you? Feel free to pause this video for a minute and just think, when you first walk into a brand new team, what does that look like to you? Well, let me tell you what it looks like for me when I first walk in a team. I'll walk in and I'll kind of try to get a sense of what's happening. So the first team meeting or team get together, I'll wait for someone to suggest something and see how it's handled at the team level. So is there a bunch of snarky comments coming back at it? Are they being admonished for having an idea that's not the status quo? Or are they being celebrated because they're bringing in something different? And one way that we do this on my team is we're free to come up with multiple ideas. I'm going to share with you in a few moments a couple strategies that we use to grow ideas, because when an idea goes in, it's just a seed, and it takes friction. It takes creative friction, and it takes intellectual friction to help that idea grow. And with psychological safety, there is psychological friction, there is creative friction, and we speak with candor. And what does that mean? Is we speak about the product. We do not focus our comments on the person. We focus on the product or idea, the concept, if you will. And one way that I make it safe to give ideas on our team is we have awards every 6 months, and we have the It Just Didn't Work award. So a great idea, but it just didn't work. Maybe it failed in testing, or when we brought it to implementation, it just didn't work, or it just didn't get off the ground whatsoever, because when we applied our intellectual and creative friction to it, it simply didn't grow. And that's great. We want to celebrate those. We don't want to celebrate only our things that implemented and had a success, because what we implement and has a success is always grounded in the stuff and the ideas and concepts that never made it that far, because we're learning as we go. And remember, psychological safety, it's inclusion safety. Learner safety is the second part. So that is one of the foundational pieces of creating psychological safety. So what does it look like if you detect a threat as you're coming into a new team? For me, I'm going to hold back, not going to give a bunch of ideas. I'm going to do just enough so I stay safe and don't have to put up with the heartburn of snarky comments or anything else. That's exactly what's going to happen. So you could see, if people detect a threat, there's no psychological safety, that team will not be innovative. It simply won't, because people are not going to put their ideas forward. Now, if you walk in and you see uh, somebody that had an idea that didn't work and we're celebrating it, almost like if you've ever seen the Disney movie Meet the Robinsons, where they celebrate something that failed because they learned. If you see that, you're going to be more willing to bring your whole self to work. Now, it's not just going to happen this quick because we're all coming from different teams, different places, and we have to really a lot of times switch our own mindset when we see that it's safe to do that. So it takes people new to the team a little bit of time because they have to go through their own personal threat detection process. And you want to help them get through that because it's important. So let's dive into what makes a high performance zone or high performing teams where you have innovation. You remember we have psychological safety here and we have performance standards here. The lower, so the low is here and high is over here. The lower the psychological safety and performance standards, notice we're going to be in some type of red zone. If you have low psychological safety and low performance standards, you have what we call the who cares zone or nobody cares zone because nobody's going to care because they can't put forth any ideas. They're just going to do the status quo. And if there's not clearly defined performance standards, they're not going to really know what to do. So they are going to do the absolute minimum and not care. That's when you're going to see a lot of folks on whatever favorite social media platform they have, whether it's Twitter, Instagram, wherever it is, that's where you're going to find them on social media, watching YouTube videos during work, whatever it may be. That's low psychological safety, low performance standards, nobody cares. Now, if you have high psychological safety, but low performance standards, we're going to have a lack of meaning zone. So in this zone, where you have high psychological safety, people are going to be collegial with each other and may even enjoy coming to work, but they're going to lack meaning. So they're not going to have that drive. When the nobody cares zone, you're going to have massive turnover. In the lack of meaning zone, you're probably going to have a little bit less turnover of employees, but what they're putting out is not going to be anything of a great significance. They're going to have a lot of fun doing it, but it's going to maintain that status quo. And that's not what we want for a high performing team. A high performing team is going to innovate. Now, if you have low psychological safety, and high performance standards, you're going to get anxiety because the person that's being held to those performance standards has no voice in what they are or how they get there. We're going to have a lot of anxiety. And you see that in places where you have a highly micromanager type of supervisor or boss, and they have high performance standards in terms of expectations. Those performance standards can still be very clear, but if you don't have employees who get to speak into what they're doing and how, specifically the how, there's going to be a lot of anxiety. So that's the anxiety zone. And what happens with anxiety? You're going to meet those standards. You're barely going to meet those standards, but you're going to burn out and you're going to have high turnover there as well. Now, if you have high psychological safety and high performance standards, that's the blue zone. That's the high performance zone. That's where people are able to bring their whole self to work, and we grow and cultivate ideas and concepts while not just meeting those performance standards, but exceeding performance standards. Because when you have psychological safety that comes with speaking with candor, comes with creative friction, intellectual friction, guess what happens? You have a group of people that are focused on a common goal of becoming better, getting things better, doing something better. And that bar gets infinitely raised. It keeps getting raised because we keep learning. And remember, learning is the second step, the second foundational step to creating psychological safety. So it has to be there. So that's how we get high performing teams. You have high performance standards, high psychological safety. And to get those high performing standards, your team has to be able to speak into the how and create ideas on how to do things better, because people want to do things better. They want to be a part of making something better. That's who we are as people. Because right now, well, for a long time, we are in a VUCA world. Our world is volatile. It is uncertain. It is VUCA. And you have to be able to make decisions, and you have to be able to move forward and adjust as you're moving forward. And the leader's not the only one that has to be able to do that. The team has to be able to do that because they are engaged with the parts and pieces of whatever concept, whatever performance standard that they're meeting. They are intimately engaged with it, and they are the ones performing the specific task. So they need that voice in there in order to be able to perform well. And fear, if you see a manager who manages by fear, and that often happens a lot in our anxiety zone, that does not work. It can have a short-term effect, but as soon as you leave, it stops. That short-term effect is gone the minute you leave. People will do the absolute minimum to secure their place in the company as they're looking for somewhere else to go. It's kind of the bottom line. So there will be turnover when there is fear. And in our VUCA world that we are defined, decisions have to be made, collaboration is required, and learning is necessary. Fear stops it. Fear stops every bit of collaboration, learning. Because no one, if you're collaborating, but you have these high performance standards, low psychological safety, guess what? It's now a competition. Nothing wrong with a good competition, but when you have one where there's no psychological safety, there will be a winner, whoever comes out on top with the most sales or whatever it is. But was it really a win for the organization? No, absolutely not, because you missed any chance to collaborate and become better. So now we're down to one person as opposed to a team. And fear inhibits all of that. These are the 4 stages that we've been talking about throughout this presentation, and they come from the 4 stages of psychological safety from Timothy R. Clark's book. It's inclusion safety, learner safety, contributor safety, and then challenger safety. Now imagine with me just for a minute if you're thinking about the leader who leads with fear. Well, when they lead with fear, you're not gonna feel included. You're not gonna feel you're able to learn, ask questions, make mistakes. You're not going to want to contribute much, and you're certainly not going to want to challenge the status quo. So let's take a look quickly at an overall view of each of the stages. And then we're going to get into what I call the EVT model, empathy, vulnerability, and trust, to show how we can implement. And then in the following video, we're going to dive into inclusion safety and look at specific behaviors that help create that environment of inclusion safety. And in the following three other videos that I'm going to put out separately, you'll find behaviors specifically for learner safety, contributor safety, and challenger safety. So let's look at inclusion safety. It is a basic human right, period. Inclusion safety is a basic human right. And when you teach that as a leader, it starts to take hold and become part of the environment, part of the culture of the team. Inclusion safety is a basic human right. So what does that mean? You have to be human and no intent to harm. The intent to harm is important because you do not have to offer someone inclusion safety who's coming in with an intent to harm. And that's physical or psychological as well. So that leader that leads by fear cannot offer inclusion safety, which is a basic human right, because you have to be able to get past that fear, that beratement, whatever it may be. And one behavior for us as a leader to really be able to show that is to listen and to pause. So you actively listen. As a leader, what you don't want to do is say, what I hear you saying is. That is not active listening. What that does is that brings the focus back to you as the leader. When we want that focus on the individual's, the content of the individual that We want the focus on the content the individual is talking about, is discussing. And then another thing is, as we listen, you can paraphrase back. So remember, I just said, don't say what I hear you saying is. No, you paraphrase. So you state what they stated in your own words back. And then you can even ask them, is that correct? And then they'll give you more in. And here's a big one. Asking why questions tends to put up a fence really quick. Ask how and what questions. When you ask how and what questions, you're going to continue to speak. And then pause is the second part of that. Take time to just pause and hear what that person is saying, and take it in and think take that time of pause to really understand and comprehend what they're saying, as opposed to formulate a response. That's why I'll listen, I'll pause, and then I'll paraphrase back what they just said and ask them if, and then I'll ask them specifically if that's what they mean, or that's the concept they're talking about. Because when we keep that on them, then the focus is on them and their idea, which makes people feel valued and included. Never shoot down an idea right up front, even if you're busy. That's a bonus one for now, because if you sit in judgment of it right away, that's going to start eroding any inclusion safety that you may have there. So if you just sit in judgment, so ponder and be curious. So we're not to sit there in judgment, we're to sit there and be curious and help the team member who's having the discussion with you to be curious as well. So that's, in a nutshell, an overview of inclusion safety. Then there's learner safety. Really unite the team with learning. Have sessions where the team gets together and learns through a collaborative process. Don't make learning a competition. Make it something we do together, and then we learn. There's multiple ways to do that within groups. We'll go through specific behaviors to do that. And you yourself as a leader, adopt a student mindset, or the beginner's mind. When you adopt that, remember we talked about curiosity and being curious and inclusion safety. That means you're curious. That means that you are able to take in more and learn more when you have that student mindset. So it means you're curious and you further dive in. And contributor safety. A couple of things we can do to create contributor safety is rotate conducting of meetings. It's that simple. Don't correct with anger, blame, or shame. When we correct, make those harsh judgments with anger, blame, or shame. And what does blame look like? How could you propose that when, 6 months ago we tried this and X happened? We don't do that. When we enter with curiosity, when we go through contributor safety, we'll go through specific behaviors to get there as well. And then challenger safety, taking your finger off the fear button. And how can you do that? One behavior is in a meeting when you're coming up with a project or some idea where it takes collaboration, assign somebody to dissent. So you're giving somebody permission to have a contrary opinion and be that person that creates that friction, both creative friction and intellectual friction. Assign dissent. And then once you start doing that, guess what? It's going to start happening natural in the team. We're going to build that friction. So the first time you assign dissent, let somebody know exactly what they're doing and tell them they're looking for flaws. Now, how do we go about starting this at work? Well, I call it EVT: empathy, vulnerability, trust. It's those three things. Empathy, Brene Brown does some great work with empathy. If you want to dive further into what empathy is, please view some of her TED Talks or anything. She does an amazing job with it. But empathy is quite a bit different than sympathy. So just show empathy or be in that moment with that person. And then vulnerability. As a leader, if you want your team to be vulnerable, and reward that vulnerability, you know what? Starts with you, starts with the leader. You have to be vulnerable. How do you show your vulnerability as a leader? Well, ask questions. Hey, you know what? I don't know the answer to this. Or how do you think we should approach this? Remember, that's not a why question. How do you think we should approach this? What would be the best outcome possible for this? And how can we get there? Start asking questions and then listening. And when you've listened and you've gotten enough great concepts, then what are we going to do after we listen? We're going to paraphrase it back and get feedback to see if we're listening well. So that feedback piece is important. And if there's creative and intellectual friction where we can speak with candor, guess what? We're going to get authentic feedback for ourselves as well to make us better as a leader. And then trust. Is it your team trusting you? Nope. Who's in charge? You're the leader, so it starts with you. You need to trust your team. Give individuals the opportunity to lead certain things. Help them, support them as much as they need. Some people need more support than others, but trust them to lead the team if they're working with a sub team as well and get the job done. Doesn't mean tune out and be aloof to whatever they're doing. It means just come in and coach as needed. You still have to have accountability, but you go in and coach as needed if you see things going astray or anything else. But trust and don't come in with that blame, shame, or fear when you have to adjust. Come in with that curious or beginner's mind. So that in a nutshell is a quick overview of psychological safety, and we're going to dive into inclusion safety.